Life gets in the way. How many times has someone recommended to you a book or a film or, dare I say, a game, only for you to respond with, "Oh, yeah, I'll check it out," or "I'll add it to the list," when we both know there is no list. Or, maybe there is, I don't know you, but the point is the same. You can start out with the best of intentions, planning to engage with some piece of media that you've been meaning to look at, only to find as the days pass by and as more things get in your way that it just never happens. I find that games are particularly easy to fall between the cracks. You can watch a film in a few hours if you put aside an evening, and I'm quite a fast reader, so books aren't usually a problem, but games? Time required to truly immerse yourself in some of these worlds can often feel overwhelming, a Herculean task that requires vast amounts of your time lest you miss any of the various collectibles, Easter eggs, or achievements. Okay, I'm being slightly overdramatic. Not all games are created equally after all. Completing Sonic the Hedgehog 2 requires far less time than, say, Fable 2, and that is if you choose to fully complete either of them. Sonic 2 can be fully completed in a few hours, but can also be played sporadically for 30 minutes or so, basically until you get bored of going from one level to the next. Fable 2 requires more engagement, but once you leave the cave and defeat Thag, you can deviate from the story to explore the world in pretty much whatever sized installments you'd like. Doing everything in a game is not essential to its enjoyment, at least not for me, but even a basic single-player campaign can still take 10 hours or more, and that's provided you don't get stuck on a puzzle or another difficult section that takes longer to overcome. As such, there are so many games that I'm aware of, many of which have been on my radar for several years, but I've never gotten around to playing despite their reputations. I can think of few games that are as celebrated as Metal Gear Solid, but after finally getting a copy, I was curious as to whether it was the kind of game that receives rapturous praise upon release, only to feel outdated 20 years later, or whether it would captivate me as it would have done to countless players back in 1996. I'd been living under a rock, and now I was lifting the rock. I was emerging from the rock. I was opening my eyes. I don't know, it was like a metaphor because it was like the title of the series. Let's just get into it. Not only had I never played a Metal Gear game before, but I was fairly new to the world of stealth games too. I'd played games with some stealth mechanics, mainly just the Arkham games, but such a heavy focus on evading detection was something of a novelty at the beginning of my playthrough. I was of course aware that Metal Gear pioneered the genre, and what can I say about it, other than sneaking around the base and avoiding enemies was incredibly enjoyable. I'll get more into the narrative later, but the seriousness of the opening cutscene and subsequent moments really gave this aspect of the game the required weight.
To investigate whether or not the terrorists have the ability to make a nuclear strike, and stop them if they do.
It wasn't boring having to wait around for guards to move or slowly crawl through a vent. It was exhilarating. It's a testament to the power of the game's atmosphere, the cutscenes, music, voice acting, all of it really, that the spell wasn't even broken by the time I got to use the famous cardboard box to evade detection. It's funny how such a comical item can exist within a story that takes itself so seriously. It's a hard balance to get right, but it doesn't feel out of place here. Another aspect of the game that I really enjoyed is the way the map opens up as you progress throughout the story. You get a keycard early on that grants you access to a limited number of doors, those marked as level 1. As you continue further, you pick up replacement cards, with each offering access to a higher level and thus more areas than the last. It makes for an incredibly addicting system, as not only is there the excitement of what new areas you'll be able to reach, but it encourages the player to revisit old areas that were previously inaccessible. I can't tell you how good it feels to see an item that you can't reach through a window, only to return and triumphantly open that door with your new access card. The system eventually peters out around the halfway mark when you get the final card, but it's no great loss as the story has pretty much taken over by then anyway. For the first portion of the game though, it fits perfectly with the stealth mechanics and the emphasis on exploration. I found the game suitably challenging, with some sections taking several attempts to complete. There was enough balance to ensure just the right amount of frustration though. I always felt like the deaths were my fault rather than the fault of shoddy game design. The puzzles were also nice and challenging, and it's here that I want to praise a specific mechanic, namely the codex system. Allies will use it to inform you about key plot developments and to offer advice throughout the game. Hints are provided via Snake's support team, but the codec won't always ring immediately after you start a new puzzle, and the amount of time given for a player to figure something out on their own felt quite refreshing. It makes the player determine when they need help, rather than forcing hints onto them straight away. They're available at any time, but only at the player's discretion. The stealth sections make up most of the game, but combat sections are also present throughout. I'll admit that compared to the stealth mechanics, I found the shooting and combat to be somewhat clunky. Aiming often felt unwieldy, and it was in these moments where I felt the game showed its age the most. But I'm prepared to overlook this, as I actually quite liked how clunky it was. Okay, look, I'm not trying to obscure any criticism, but the fact that I found the shooting to be as uncomfortable as I did actually helped reinforce the importance of being stealthy. I'm playing my way through Arkham Asylum at the moment, maybe for a future video, just saying. And that game also has stealth sections, but the combat is so fluid that if I get caught, it's often easier just to fight my way out, provided there aren't too many assailants. Over time, this reduces the importance of remaining undetected, that the risk of being uncovered begins to fall away. In contrast, as I worked my way through Metal Gear, I was constantly trying to avoid detection, and not just because that was the mission, but because I didn't want to start shooting if I didn't have to. And aside from a few exceptions, like the stairwell or the final stretch to the Jeep, the focus on stealth ensured that I could go long stretches without having to resort to a gunfight. The largest exception to this was of course the boss fights, but the clunkiness here was offset by the fact that the areas in which the fights took place were designed for combat. Corridors built for stealth were quick to feel claustrophobic whenever the shooting started, but the clashes between bosses took place in locations that were built to encourage and facilitate specific combat mechanics. The long, grid-like passages during the Vulcan Raven fight, for example, exist for the player to plant claymores and pilot missiles. That's their purpose. You can perform other attacks, of course, it's not constricting in that sense, but the bosses were obviously designed with specific weaknesses for the player to learn and exploit, and the locations serve to assist this process. The Sniper Wolf fight was also a highlight, although at first I had a hard time even finding her, let alone shooting her. Once you work out where she is, it's pretty easy to follow her, but until then the threat that she poses feels very real as you're getting shot again and again, unable to work out where it's coming from. The bosses have great endings too, with cutscenes that provide characterization that runs deeper than just they're the enemy. Each boss feels like an equal to Snake, and even though he eventually prevails, they never feel weak when compared to the final bosses. Each fight feels important, and each victory feels earned. Sniper Wolf's death in particular demonstrates the mutual respect between Snake and his opponents. The pair had been trying to kill each other just moments earlier, but Snake consoles her as she's dying, refuting her claims and assures her that she should retain her pride.
Rest easy. You'll die as the proud wolf you are.
They're both soldiers, and they both respect the abilities of one another, as well as the effect that this life has on anyone who chooses it. They're both still human, after all, and as Sniper Wolf says, she doesn't kill for sport. She's not pure evil. She spared Meryl's life because she wasn't her target, and Snake recognizes this. The bosses aren't just faceless opponents waiting to be beaten. Each one of them allows Snake to confront aspects of his own life, to reflect on the choices he's made and has yet to make. It's like they offer him glimpses of what his life could have been had he chosen differently, making his moments of humanity, his relationship with Meryl or Otacon, all the more important. Snake emerges as perhaps my biggest surprise when playing Metal Gear Solid. I knew of him as an iconic video game character, but this was pretty much limited to his inclusion in Smash Brothers, and that's about it. I had an impression of him as a stoic, somewhat blank anti-hero, a morally grey character who really existed more as a mould for the player to insert themselves into. I imagined him almost like a proto-Master Chief, and so you can imagine my surprise as the story unfolded and Snake became fully realised, a three-dimensional character. And I don't just mean because he's made of polygons. At first the plot felt very reminiscent of a Brosnan-era James Bond film, perhaps on purpose. Those were, after all, contemporary for the time, and Hideo Kojima is known to be a keen cinephile. Snake must infiltrate a terrorist organisation that has stolen a US superweapon and defeat their leader, Liquid Snake, very much his equal. Snake initially fell into the role that I had fashioned for him. He was blunt, calm under pressure, and steadfast in the pursuit of his mission. The emergence of Grey Fox was probably the first indication of his hidden depths. A comrade that Snake thought dead, now reborn in front of him, prompts an understated reaction, sure, but one that hints at a human side beneath his gruff exterior. Further scenes only confirmed this. I've already talked about the Sniper Wolf scene, but there are also smaller moments that build together in creating a deeper character than I originally took him for. He'll open up to Otacon about losing Meryl and then ask him if he's okay, or he'll lie to Naomi about Fox in order to protect her feelings. He'll talk about love and how it can happen even in war, and he'll refuse to kill Fox at the end even though it would stop Metal Gear and fulfill his mission. It helps that the voice acting is great. Clearly a lot of effort went into making the audio as immersive as possible.
Snake! What was she fighting for? What am I fighting for? What are you fighting for?
If we make it through this, I'll tell you.
Having said that, the dialogue is just one part of Kojima's wide-ranging attention to this game's presentation. From the moment it starts, every care is taken to make this game look and feel as cinematic as possible. I don't know how unique this aspect of the game was for the time. I know that Metal Gear didn't invent cutscenes or anything. I actually have a video on that topic, you can watch it here. But I still think it speaks volumes that, graphics aside, the cutscenes feel as contemporary as they do. The game even utilises real-world footage to complement the commentary on real-world issues like nuclear disarmament or landmines. It makes for a game that can easily surpass the constraints of its dated visuals. Graphics improve, older games show their age, that's inevitable. But good pacing, good acting, good direction, these things are timeless. I don't want to do the game a disservice by saying that it's trying to be a film, however. The cutscenes are very well directed and they enhance the immersion for sure, but to overemphasize this game's cinematic qualities runs the risk of ignoring the fact that it utilizes some incredibly creative gameplay mechanics. These design choices subvert the expectations of a video game as much as the cutscenes employ the conventions of a film. I don't want to pretend that I'm an expert on this franchise or its creator, the whole premise of the video would refute that, but I am aware of the discourse surrounding Kojima and his status as an auteur of this medium. Given the impression that his inclusions made on me during my playthrough, I can say that I wholeheartedly agree with that assessment. The first example that springs to mind is the set of tripwires in the hangar. When I started the game, I noticed that you could smoke cigarettes, and at first I thought that was just a funny little joke, that smoking would decrease your health with no feasible benefits other than getting to watch Snake do it. But later on, when I was confronted with invisible tripwires, I suddenly had the thought to try smoking a cigarette, and sure enough, the wires became visible. There was no hint that this could be done, no sign that pushed me to try it, just a connection that I made on my own. It felt amazing. And it was just the tip of the iceberg as far as interesting game design is concerned. You know what's coming. I had just beaten Revolver Ocelot and was being told that the frequency to contact Meryl was on the back of the CD case. I'd been given a disc by Baker but couldn't figure out how to use it, let alone check the back of it. I don't know what made me think of it, but I remembered there being a screenshot of a codec frequency on the back of the actual packaging that the game came in. It wasn't a number that I had used yet, so I called it, and what do you know? This blew me away. As fourth wall breaks go, I don't think I'd ever seen anything better. This wasn't just a wink at the camera or an address to the audience. This broke me out of the game and forced me to solve a problem in the real world so that I could use the answer back in the game. And then they did it again. Psycho Mantis. Oh my god, what a clever idea. It's a twisted kind of logic, but logic nonetheless. He can read your mind and so he knows your moves, but if you switch controller ports, he can't predict your actions. I know that this is nearly a 30-year-old game, so these will not be revelations for anyone even remotely familiar with it. But I wasn't familiar with it at all. I just thought it was going to be a good stealth game, and it was that too. But these features took the game to another level. It's like watching a great movie. The story and acting and music, all these things make for a good film, but good direction can enhance them further and make something even greater than the sum of its parts. I love The Shining, for example. It's a great story with eerie music and two standout performances from both Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall. But the direction elevates it to something greater than just a good film. The tracking shots, the quick cuts, these elements create a feeling in the mind of the viewer, even if you can't always pinpoint what it is that makes you feel the way that you do. That's how these design choices felt, except they were so much easier to marvel at. They were out in the open, able to be seen and appreciated clearly, and these were just the ones that stood out the most. There's the torture scene where if you give in, you lose your progress and change the ending of the game, although I wasn't aware of that at the time, and the key that needs to be frozen to become usable, requiring you to return to a cold part of the map where it will freeze in your possession. There's the fact that you can take diazepam to stop your hands from shaking whilst you're holding the sniper rifle, or that when Liquid Snake plants a bomb on you, it actually appears in your inventory, so you have to actively discard it. Maybe there were games before Metal Gear Solid that contained features like these. Maybe games made since have done similar things too. I won't act like I've played every game ever made. I mean, I've not even played every critically acclaimed game. Clearly, this video could show you that. I just wanted to put across how incredibly fresh and creative these choices felt. They work on two levels, heightening the immersion and connection to Snake, but also just as charming gameplay features. At several points throughout my playthrough, I found myself grinning helplessly at the sheer ingenuity that I was witnessing. That giddiness, that joy, it doesn't happen all the time. Metal Gear Solid is a masterpiece. I have no hesitation in placing it amongst the greatest games that I've ever played. It obviously contains elements that feel slightly outdated now, but these were easily overcome, even if novelty was a key part of my enjoyment at the start of the playthrough. I don't mean this in a patronising way, but I do like playing old games, and part of this is rooted in getting to grips with the quirks that mark their age, graphics, camera movements, things like that. But the more I played Metal Gear Solid, the more I felt that sense of novelty slipping away. It's not that the game's flaws ceased to be noticeable, but rather they were rendered ignorable by my immersion in the narrative, coupled with utterly original and compelling gameplay mechanics that are tied to the outdated features of the game in a positive way. Features that rely on checking a memory card or switching controller ports can't help but feel antiquated in today's gaming landscape, but this only reinforces how brilliantly unconventional they are. I've made it pretty clear how much these inclusions blew me away. Now, you could argue that they're more gimmicks than anything else and exist as one-off quirks to elicit this kind of reaction from a first-time player, rather than in-depth mechanics designed to be sustained and improved upon throughout the game. I would argue that their sheer ingenuity warrants their brief inclusion, an ingenuity that would risk being diluted from multiple uses. Finding the frequency on the CD case was a great moment, but would it have been as exciting the second or third time you had to look for it? The game was also so well written and well designed that these moments never felt like they were making up for other deficiencies. It would have been just as enjoyable an experience without them. They just exist as bonuses. Throughout writing this, I had to keep reminding myself that this wasn't a full-on retrospective. I wasn't trying to analyse the game definitively. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to do a deep dive at some point in the future to properly delve into why I think this game works as well as it does. I feel like I've only scratched the surface with this video. But that's okay, because I wanted this to be a document of my initial thoughts, my first experience of playing a game that enjoys as much acclaim as it does. One of the difficulties in playing older games with such reputations is that they inevitably age in ways that renders some of their initial praise redundant. Super Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time were both lauded for successfully transitioning their respective franchises into 3D, but to play them now is to realise how much better designers have gotten at making 3D games. This isn't a dig at those games, I love both of them. I play them now and enjoy them for their style, their individual level design, their stories, their music. These attributes are ageless, but the thing that made them so revolutionary in the mid-90s, their demonstration of what three-dimensional gaming could be, just doesn't seem so special in the modern day when taken at face value. I can't honestly say that these games haven't been improved upon mechanically, because they have. Of course they have, that's the nature of game development, everything is eventually improved upon. Some games have it worse than others. When GoldenEye was re-released on Game Pass last year, every review I read seemed to be tempered with the qualifier "at the time." It was revolutionary at the time, it was mind-blowing at the time. You need this distinction because if someone is playing it for the first time who only knows of its reputation and has already played the games that took its formula and improved upon it, then they're probably going to be disappointed, or at the very least will have to deal with signs of age that wouldn't have been apparent when it was first released. I just don't think Metal Gear Solid suffered as much from this problem. The biggest markers of its age were the visuals, but the direction and cinematography more than made up for the dated graphics in the cutscenes. Also, and this is more of a personal opinion, dated graphics just don't bother me much. Good art direction and visual style are timeless, and I find they normally shine through the restrictions of their hardware. You're not going to believe this, but older games don't look as good as modern ones. I know that's crazy, but I do think outdated visuals still have artistic merit in a way that outdated game design just doesn't. There's a reason modern games still utilize 8 and 16-bit styles, and even if 64-bit games aren't quite as ageless, a game like Majora's Mask, for example, actually benefits from the low-poly look of its characters and world that only the N64 could provide. Outside of the graphics, I was confronted with a tense and engaging story matched by equally suspenseful stealth mechanics to try and master. The bosses were tough but rewarding, and as each member of Foxhound fell, or as each new security door became accessible, I felt as if I was getting one step closer to understanding the enigmatic character that I controlled. I'm looking forward to playing the sequel at some point, but even more than that, I'm looking forward to playing this game again. In fact, as soon as I finished it and as the credits rolled, my only thought was, I want to play it again, straight away. I can't remember the last time I felt that way about a game, to want to beat it again as soon as I'd finished. If that's not praise, then I don't know what is.